Welcome everybody to IMAGI-NATION TV as we kick off another week. And this week we're looking at the big topic of trust. Now, when we think about trust, one of the challenges is working out how the heck do you get there? You know, what are the roads that drive all the way to this big, amazing paradise called trust? And over the years, as we've been working with kids from marginalized backgrounds and often having university students who have come out of privileged backgrounds working with these kids, we've had to try and build a bridge between them. And I've reflected a lot around the concept of trust. And I think often we get to saying we trust someone finitely, and then we jump to the other end to go, we don't trust them. And that can happen so quickly. That can happen with one decision or one piece of behavior that can suddenly wipe away 20 years of trusting someone, or 20 weeks or 20 hours. So when we work through this conversation today, one of the things I'm fascinated in exploring is how do we get to trust? What are the ingredients of it? And how do we make it, break it, and then remake it? And can trust be rebuilt? And what are our ways to get there? We have a wonderful panel joining us today. We have Blair, Margaret Zhang, Sherice Jackson, and Dr. Phil Jauncey are going to be joining us. And we've got a short video that's going to kick us off before we head into the conversation.
If you don't want to work, don't bother dreaming.
Shame is just nothing.
All of us are dealt different cards, and those cards can be awful, but it's what you do. You are responsible for your reaction.
Our goal with IMAGI-NATION TV is to bring a mentor into every kid's life all around the world every single day. As we're facing the challenges of COVID-19, with 1.37 billion kids being affected with their education, there's an opportunity to reinvent the way we think about education. And this can be one of those methods, one of the ways that we can gather together for half an hour or an hour with a group of eclectic thinkers who don't have extreme views on one side or the other, but come together in a melting pot to try and help us all make sense of the world today so we can imagine the world tomorrow. Sherice Jackson, you're the youngest of our panelists today who is joining us. I would love to hear from you about your experience with trust. I know you've been a mentee in the program, and we worked together last year as you were the co-CEO. And the co-CEO model for us takes a young Indigenous person and gives them the chance to shadow me for a year. And then we throw them in the deep end. We send them off to sit down with CEOs of big corporate executives, with vice chancellors of businesses, to really reflect on all of these different worlds and work out how they work. So Sherice, what's your take on trust?
First of all, thank you for having me on the show today. I'm really, really excited to be here. I guess trust is something that is, like you said, it's so fragile. It can be taken away in seconds. So I think, trust is just something that you can't even talk about. Like, you can't just ask someone to trust you. You need to show actions in order for people to trust. And last year, I had to convince a lot of people to put trust in a 20/21-year-old. So I feel like I've done that through my actions. And, I had AIM people and corporates and partners having to trust me with the word of AIM as I went out and, was the face of us for the year. I guess also for me, I had to learn to trust these places that historically didn't really support our people and stuff. So I had to really put a lot of trust in different things. But like I said, trust is something that it's super fragile, and you need to be careful with it.
Wayne, when you direct an actor or a group of actors, how the heck do you get them to give you their bodies, their soul, their spirit, and commit to a script and commit to your vision?
Yeah, it's oh hey Jack, hey everyone. It's not hard at all. It's just it requires a process to have that. It requires a process from me that sort of I've been working in the directing and acting world for sort of 15 to 20 years, and it's just a basis of just communicating and talking with someone and just sharing ideas, because we've all been hurt, you know. We've all seen people that have come up to us, I think, at some time and just offer something and sort of don't commit to what they've originally offered. And so it's having the hindsight straight away, but it's having that sort of real integrity, sort of to commit to something and have the follow through of an idea or a shared conversation for me. And I feel like, you know, like I worked on a television show up in Broome, and all that new country for me to be up there, Yarroo country. And I worked on a film. We shot up in Kakadu, Tiwi Islands, all around the Darwin area in the northern part of Australia. And when you have the key to sort of Kakadu and the Northern Territory, say as a filmmaker, you do that with respect. There's a lot of cups of teas and there's a lot of just sitting down and saying nothing, and just being present with someone and not and making someone a cup of tea, or you know, building a fire together. It sounds sort of it sounds that's the way I've done it, and just sort of being there and coming back, and then once you do the sort of story, etc. Whether what it may be is to have to come back again and again, because people just see that and it stays with the ethos of who you are and what they give you.
The that idea around all of us being hurt at some point is so powerful, because we all, you know, we all bleed the same blood. We all have pain. We all have happiness and joy. And yeah, I think about, we had a guest called Daisy Jeffrey who joined us last Monday, who helped kickstart and lead a lot of the student strike marches against climate challenges in Australia. And Daisy was talking about that hope without action doesn't have the same power. And perhaps trust, as you're saying, Wayne, seeing through the project, following through and being there and completing it gives more weight to it. Marg, when you're sitting down to take someone's photo, how the heck do you build an environment and a space around so they can give you a permanent insight into their life forever?
Yeah, I mean, like Wayne was saying, it's really about a relationship. Like, you can't really build a foundation of trust without there being a relationship or you making that effort to establish that relationship. And something really important to remember that I think we do forget now that, you know, we're so much on phones and computers and in this digital space, is that we need to ensure that those relationships are for the long haul, right? We're not just in it for a flash in the pan. We're not just in it for this moment and to capitalize on this moment. And it's not just even about the subject, you know, whether that's the photo work I do or the motion work I do. You are communicating and building a relationship and creating a trusting relationship between yourself and your subject on the other side of the camera. But you have to remember too that it's also a relationship with whoever is consuming the content afterwards, right? Like the finished product, the finished image, the finished film, or your finished writing. You're also holding out yourself and your work and your perspective as something that you would hope that your audience would trust as your creative process or your creative output, and you would hope that they would come back, like Sherice and Wayne were both saying.
It's being there for the longer term. I found that really challenging working in New York over the last 3 or 4 years as we set AIM up globally. And that environment, of any environment I've been in the world, it feels like it's short, fast-paced, high interaction engagements, and then people can say to your face, yeah, we're totally going to work together and we're definitely going to do this, and you can walk out of a meeting thinking it's all going to happen, and then there's no follow-through. I've never been in an environment where big words would happen and often the action would just never follow through. And I got quite I got quite down early and had to work out how to be resilient in New York. How have you navigated the facade from the reality in New York? Because there are a lot of people that do follow through, but yeah, how do you work through that in that town and that space where you're living at the moment?
I mean, that's that's a good perspective to have in hindsight. And I think that highlights the importance of trusting your instincts as well. It does kind of become quite easy to get lost in the storm and lose your sense of self and self-worth and the value add that you have on the conversation, or, you know, the value that you bring to the table in any work or friendship or, you know, interperson interaction. I think it's a learning process. I'm not going to say that I've mastered it at all. And, you know, like you say, New York is quite a high octane, super intense environment at times. But I think times like this, even though it feels a little scary and we're all at home and it can feel a bit trapping, I think it's important to look at the upside of this and realize, you know, who are the people who are really there for you, who are the people that you do trust, and who are the people that you really have those relationships with, who are reaching out and making sure that you're good, and who are brainstorming with you and looking at this time as a runway and as a time to build foundations for how you can better interact with others and your community and your work community moving forward.
Dr. Phil Jauncey, you've been to 3 Olympics or involved with 3 Olympics. I'm fascinated to hear specifically, a little birdie told me you've done some work with Wayne Bennett, and would love to hear about, you know, working with someone like Wayne Bennett or working with high performance coaches. How do you build their ability to tackle this concept of trust? We have a question from the chat line which said, from Madison Leonard, how do we relearn to trust people who have previously broken it? If you're working with a Wayne Bennett or you're working with an Olympics coach who's got an athlete that they've been with them for years and maybe that trust has broken down, what have we got to do to rebuild trust?
Well, I think one of the things you've got to be careful is don't ever try to get your beliefs and your feelings right. For example, trust by definition means having doubt. I have no trust in the seat I'm sitting in right now because I didn't make it. And if I'd made it, that would take a lot of trust. Same thing, a religious belief has to have doubt before you can have faith. And so what happens is, what I teach is, if you can't see it, you can't fix it. So I've never seen a trust, but I've seen people acting trustworthily. For example, I don't always feel like a loving husband, a loving dad. I can always act that way. So my basic view of helping people is say, listen, don't wait to feel good to act good. When you act good, it feels good. My dad was a psychologist, and years ago, a man came to him and said, oh, Dr. Jauncey, I've fallen out of love with my wife. I want to divorce her. My dad's fine. What I want you to do for the next 5 days, do something special for wife every day. Like what? Take her out, buy some flowers. On the 6th day, he came back and said, Dr. Jauncey, I'm embarrassed. My dad said, why? I've fallen in love with my wife. So what happened was, he was waiting to feel romantic to act romantically. It's the other way around. When you act romantically, you feel romantic. So what I have found is, I always try to act trustingly of people. And they may prove I'm wrong, but I always try to act that way. And the more I act trustingly, the more I feel trust. And the way the brain works, it says anytime you do something, if it's working for you, I'll make you feel good. If it's not working, feel bad. For example, if I have anger, I have no control over that anger. But as soon as I act angrily, my brain makes me feel bad. When I say, hey, g'day, and I don't feel angry, I feel good. Or if you just got a job that I think I deserve and I think you backstabbed to get it, I cannot control feeling jealous. What I can control is saying, you backstabbing scoundrel. Everybody says, thank heavens we didn't give the job to Phil. Or I can say, listen, I really thought it's going to get the job, really thought it's better for the job. How can I help you? And that makes me feel good. So the question we always have to have, whatever belief we have, is my reaction to it making it better? So if I don't trust you, by me acting untrustworthily, does it make it better? No, it makes it worse. But if I start acting trustingly, you actually start trusting me, and we start getting better.
Yeah, building, that's a fascinating concept. The concept that we're building caricatures for ourselves to embody, and then in embodying them, they're becoming reality. Wayne, when you have acted or directed, in the realm of getting people to embody a character, do you lean on a Stanislavski? Have you got different methods that you're working towards? I think from talking to my partner about Stanislavski, that a lot of that work's about trying to understand the full character, which sounds a lot like what Dr. Phil's sharing there, that if you can understand the character of where you want to go, what a trustworthy person might be like, then you have a chance to maybe be able to embody it. What's what's a process that you try and work towards, Wayne, when you're creating and helping people create characters, either yourself or others?
Gee whiz, that could be my own session or together in my own brain. But I'll tell you, Jack, I'll share some information. I suppose for me, it's an element of my ingredients are a little bit of everything, and what works particularly for that role. Definitely Stanislavski. I think I did go to an acting school in Brisbane, in Queensland, in Australia, called QUT, and definitely we were taught about that. And so the elements of that work and other works that I've been around, all the directors, all the other storytellers that I've had the benefit of learning from has come into my world. So for each different project for me, it sort of chops and it changes, it adjusts, and I massage myself, I suppose. When you have this time to reflect and think back, when you get asked that question, you sort of go, hey, how do I do that? I think I do that by just sort of listening and just feeling what the air is and feeling what that character is. And for the acting side of things, I sort of really jump into the deep end with all, in the sense of just committing to it, 120%. I suppose that happens in the directing side. I just think, I've made mistakes in the past, I suppose, early on and throughout my career, and I've learnt from that. So I suppose it comes with trial and error, and you sort of learn from, not mistakes, but things you might have done differently. And you just got to, you can't quit. You got to keep chipping away. And I just sort of want to keep moving ahead slowly and just sort of get those little people around me, and that can inform me of who I am, because that comes out in my work. And then I can really sort of, for that particular time period and for that particular character or for that particular screen script, it'll just come out, I suppose. And inherently, they're probably all very, very similar. But those little changes can be subtle, but they sort of make a difference. Hopefully I've answered that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for giving us an insight and wandering into the real and the unreal, of which you build a wonderful bridge between all the time. Sherice, when we think about breaking someone's trust, I don't know if we can control their reactions to feeling that way. How do you, or how should one try and put to rest the anxiety and all of the hurt and the pain and the suffering that comes from the fact you don't get your time again? And if the person isn't willing to forgive you in that interaction, then what do we do? How do we progress?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So like, how do we forgive ourselves? Is that so? Yeah, like I really have no idea. And I guess that's something that, I'm learning and focusing on as I grow into a young woman as well. You're always going to make mistakes, and you might break someone's trust. And, I think, like I said before, it's all in your actions, and it takes a long time to rebuild trust. I don't think trust is something that just happens and you can't just, like I said before, just ask someone to trust you and that's how it happens. So it takes a long process of showing your actions and being trustful to rebuild someone's trust. So, and then I guess, like learning and growing from that experience and not doing something to break someone's trust again. I feel like I'm a fairly trustworthy person, and, I've had people, break my trust before, but it takes those steps and working together to build that trust back up again.
Thanks, Sherice. Marg, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I guess what's interesting about it is that because we look at time linearly, I think people often make the mistake of thinking that, it's a binary approach, whether, somebody either trusts you or they don't, or like we're all sitting on the same sliding scale of, in our work, the standards of success that we have, or like the indicators of friendship and things like that. But everybody has a very different plane or scale of how they assess their relationship with other people, whether that's in work or personal life. And I guess it's important for us all to acknowledge that it's a constant process, and it's always going to evolve dependent on what's happening in individuals' lives at any given point in time. And that's been a really big learning curve culturally for me, for instance, because, I work a lot in a lot of different regions internationally with very different fundamental value systems. China is very different which is my heritage and where I do a lot of work as well, compared to, like you were saying before, like the US. The way that the work culture is in New York is very different to how it is in Australia, and the way that we approach our relationships and our networks and our communities. And so I think it's important to kind of once in a while zoom out a little bit and look at the big picture and see, assess your relationships on a case-by-case basis. And yes, you can have an immediate reaction to something, but it's important not to treat things reactively, because if you're just constantly on the back foot and responding immediately to what someone's doing because of some external factor that you might not know about, then you're never really going to get ahead and have that full understanding of where you stand with people. But, you know, no one's got it fully sorted. You know, we're all kind of learning as we go.
Yeah, I think that's a lighthearted way to finish a complex thought, and almost the meaning of all of the thinking that we try and do, that no one's ever going to have it sorted, and we're all just trying to find our way as we're wandering around it. I got taught once that a problem well framed is a problem half solved. Dr. Phil, how much do we undo ourselves in identifying what the problem is before we go and then try and create a diagnosis?
Well, one of the big problems we have, and you mentioned the word anxiety or fear, they come from when we're saying, if only. For example, if only we didn't have coronavirus, if only I hadn't made this mistake. And the brain doesn't like us ever saying if only, because you never say it when it's true. I would not say if only I'm talking to you right now. If only my friends call me Moz, that's a mosquito, buzz around, make a lot of noise, no sense, because they do. So what we have to do is we move the if the other side. Only if I do what can I make things better. For example, only if I do what with this obstacle can make an opportunity. Only if I do what with this problem make a potentiality. So rather than only if I hadn't lost that person's trust, only if I do what, where do I go from here? And I think the best phrase that everybody should have for positive emotional health is they should say, where do I go from here? Because there's always something to do. And the moment we do that, the brain helps us get there. When we regret the past and wish the past would change, the brain says it's going to help you self-destruct, make us feel bad, and makes it worse. And you've all said about mistakes. I always say the highest degree you get in life is the Bachelor of Hard Knocks, because of the BHK, because I've learned by my mistakes. That's what's made me so educated, because I've stuffed up so many times.
Thank you. I'm going to our chat line now just for a few comments that are coming through. So we've got Yes Margs from Cy Philby. Tom Wensley saying trust needs doubt, ! Marcus Bishop is saying that all of the panel is just dropping truth bombs, which I think is a positive thing. Grace Douglas, how cool is the brain? Jamie Laverty said, beautifully said. Phil Gemma thinks that you need your own show. So we'll see if we can maybe extend it out for you. Have you, Sherice, Margaret, Phil, Wayne, got any questions of each other for the next few minutes before we wrap up?
I might ask Sherice, as a young lady, and you're just looking forward and you have self-doubt, but you're still going forward anyway. How does that feel when you actually say, despite my doubts, I move forward?
I think I don't really know if I understand the question, but like I've got, the self-doubt might come sometimes, but I've got a great bunch of people behind me who push me and tell me like that they believe in me and just to go for it. So I have a really great group of people to help.
Once you've gone forward, how does that feel?
Once I've gone for it, it feels great. I'm glad.
That's the point we have to make for all our listeners, that it's okay to doubt, but if you go forward, it feels good.
Exactly.
Marg, did you have a question you want to jump in with?
Yeah, I did. I guess for Wayne, like filmmaker to filmmaker, obviously there's so much community, so much of a community component in a film industry, particularly in Australia, where we're comparably small industry compared to a lot of international spaces. Do you feel like there's a necessity of fostering kind of a support system of each other, as opposed to feeling like you're constantly in competition, like having this collective trust being really important as far as, crowdsourcing ideas or sharing resources?
Yeah, I think that's very important. I feel like in my industry, I've been around 20 years. I said 15 to 20 years to make it sound like I haven't been around that long. But yeah, it's been 20 years. Yeah, boring, Wayne. But I feel like with the people that I revolve around, and usually they're more so Indigenous filmmakers and the non-Indigenous filmmakers I do call friends and call very good friends, and being best men at their wedding or MCs or whatever. These people, I feel like there's an element of competitiveness totally, and I don't like it. I really sort of tell my friends or friendly reminders, hey, look, don't start saying that about that project or that project. I'm talking to you as a friend, and I don't care if you feel it was better. I remember a good mate of mine said at a certain film festival 10 years ago that he got a little bit jealous when I won this award, when I won a sort of award for a short film or something. And I was like, hey, look, didn't tell me that 10 years ago. Nah, I wanted to admit, he only said that 6 months ago. I felt that was nice for him to share that, but I just went, it exists. And it probably exists in me, but I just, we're all there for each other at times like this. And so I think inherently that that negative side or that envy is there, but you just have to understand it's there and say, stay there now. But, and just, try to be the warrior rather being the warrior. And I feel like for my friend, sorry?
It's interesting too that you guys had a trusting enough relationship that he was able to share that with you, and then you can address that. I think that's really important too, to have that level of transparency and openness, so that you can really in a very open forum kind of have that conversation and break it down so that there's no misinterpretation of what that means.
And I think with that point, because it's such a fascinating one, which will then take us off into empathy, and we'll be heading off for a long time on that conversation, we might wrap up today. And I think it's a really important thought, because we've spoken a lot today about what we can control when we are the person that is in a trusting relationship and has a relationship broken, and what do we do? The other lesson here is, what do we do when we're on the other side, when we feel like we've had our trust broken, when we feel like someone has let us down? Being able to practice empathy and understanding and give endless second chances as much as you possibly can. There's absolutely fatalistic errors, and most of them end you up in some form of prison or end you up in a significant place where society will help build those ramifications. And then everything else is a grey space morally. And if we can give ourselves the freedom to be flawed, we're going to have much healthier relationships and much better chances of building trust and rebuilding trust, because I think it's going to be a continuum for all of us to keep building together. Sherice Jackson, Margaret Zhang, Dr. Phil, Jauncey, Wayne, Blair, thank you for joining us on IMAGI-NATION TV. If you want to jump onto the YouTube chat line, I'm sure the group would love to have a quick chat to you afterwards. And thank you all for everything that you do and what you brought to the show today.
Yo.
Thank you.
Catch you soon. Today, to wrap up the show, we're going to go to a very special interview we conducted with AIM TV a few years ago with a guy named Rory Stein, who was Mandela's chief bodyguard. Now, Rory spent years protecting, as a police officer, apartheid, and then later on in his life got the opportunity to serve as Mandela's chief bodyguard. Now, to look at the journey of trust from white to black, from oppositional forces, and coming together and reimagining and rewiring our mindset. This interview does it beautifully. And before we go there, if you want to support the program, jump onto aimmentoring.com. You can grab an Imagination hoodie and support this program to get out to as many kids as we possibly can, as we try and support those 1.37 billion kids that have been affected by COVID-19. And if you want to give a small donation, jump on the website as well. Thank you all for tuning into IMAGI-NATION TV. If you want to work with us and continue to share this out there, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks again to our guests today, to Margaret Zhang, to Dr. Phil, to Wayne, Blair, and to Sherice Jackson for joining us. And now we'll throw to Rory Stein, who will take us out for today. And we'll see you tomorrow for the youngsters segment. All right, guys, take care. Rory, thank you for joining us today on AIM TV.
You're welcome.
You've spent 5 years alongside arguably one of the modern greats as his chief of security, the human shield alongside President Mandela. And before that, you grew up in apartheid South Africa as a white South African. Can you take us back in time to the South Africa you grew up in?
I can almost understand it when Germans tell us today that they didn't know what the Nazis were up to, because I didn't know what was going on until you finished school. If you were a white male in South Africa in the 80s, which is when I finished school, you had to go to the army for 2 years, compulsory military conscription. But I chose not to go to the army. I joined the police force.
So there's a decade where you're defending the law of apartheid.
Absolutely. And I mean, some of those laws were horrific. Apartheid means separating people based on the color of their skin. So it said, you guys will grow up and be schooled and live over there apart from us over here. But where it became so ridiculous, where it became petty apartheid, was if you had a factory that produced furniture, then the black man could push the piece of untreated timber into this end of the machine because it's raw timber. But if it comes out on the other side, tooled to be a table leg, that's now a product. So only a white person can take that and assemble it into a stool or a table. I mean, how ridiculous is that? That's how iniquitous some of the laws that built the apartheid system were.
1990, Mandela comes out of prison and is talking about a united South Africa.
Yes.
Then 4 years later, we find Nelson Mandela's become the president.
Yeah.
He's been inaugurated and he makes his way to Ellis Park and you're there, and so he's at a soccer game. There's 60-odd thousand people at the soccer game. He walks out on the field, he shakes hands with both of the teams, he walks back in and he has to get back to the inauguration. And
by helicopter.
And then there's a moment after he is about to be whisked away in the car where he goes up to your boss. What happens?
Well, in the most incredible exchange that I think I've heard, he puts his hand out and says to him, Colonel, I just want you to know that today you have become our police. I'm now the president of this country, but I want you to know that there's no more you and us. You are now our police. And this old warrior cop, with all the lines on his face to show it, starts crying. And the tears are running down his face and dripping onto the polished wooden floor. And I'm watching and listening to this thinking, what have I just heard? And the great thing about that, Jack, and this is one of the things that makes Mandela so impressive as an historic figure, is that it was utterly consistent with what he said from the dock at his treason trial 40-something years ago. So in 1964, he makes this statement from the dock as the accused number one. And it was a very risky strategy from a legal perspective. So his legal team advised him, don't do it, because this could indeed induce the judge to convict you of treason and sentence you to death. But he said, no, he needs to do it. So he makes this famous speech.
I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons will live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an idea for which I hope to live to see realized. But my Lord, if it needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die.
And I looked at this and I thought, you know what? I think I have been wrong, and I think I need to give this a chance. And I started to believe in that. And it didn't take long. I'm talking 2 months, 3 months maximum. Now think about that in terms of the 30-something years of conditioning. Within a matter of 3 months, I'm a believer. And I committed myself to being the best new South African that I could be. And if there was any way that I could undo some of the injustice that I'd been a part of, just as a serving police officer, then I'll do that.
Can you leave us with a final set of thoughts as to what's driving you and what we may be able to take from that in our work to try and come together?
One of the things that President Mandela was crystal clear on was that his education is the answer to a better future and a better life. Make sure you take advantage of every opportunity to be educated. if your parents are sacrificing, working extra jobs, going without to give you a decent education, don't abuse that. That's what he would say. And the second thing he would say, what he would say to people like me, who do come from a position of privilege and have had education, he said it to us on numerous occasions. He said, every one of you who has had the benefit and the privilege of a decent education have a responsibility to pass that on by training up others and being a good example. So absolutely is what he would have said.
Rory, thank you for joining us on AIM TV.
No
it's
worries.
been a pleasure catching up with you.
You're very welcome, mate.
See you guys.
Yeah.